In 1942, the Nazis decided to cleanse the Lodz Ghetto of its unproductive population. They took children under 10 from their parents and sent them straight to the gas chambers. Historians estimate that the Nazis killed between 10,000 and 15,000 children in just 1 week. In September 1942, the Polish industrial city of Lodz was unbearably hot. The temperature rose above 40 degrees several times. The city was divided into 2 parts: the ghetto, where more than 200,000 Jews lived, or rather existed, during the war, and the territory for people of a slightly better sort. People there also died from diseases and German bullets, but their chances of survival were greater. After the occupation began, the Nazis even renamed the city. By personal decision of Adolf Hitler, Lodz became Litzmannstadt. In honor of the German General Karl Litzmann, the ghetto was accursed, literally and figuratively scorched earth. During 2 years of German rule, the grass, bushes and trees here dried up. Due to the terrible hunger, the prisoners ate dogs and cats. By that time, as its inhabitants recalled, not even birds flew over the territory of the ghetto. Children and adults had long since realized that insects and worms could be boiled and eaten, so there was simply no food left for the birds. Diseases, hunger, inhumane conditions. The Jews thought they were living in hell, but the real hell was yet to come. It began on Saturday, September 5, 1942. The events that will be discussed are called by Polish historians the Great Ban, a complete ban on leaving their homes. What happened 75 years ago is in the memory of older residents of Lodz, but many people know almost nothing about these facts. The Lodz catastrophe was lost among the many war crimes of that time. The few survivors of this catastrophe were so shocked by what they experienced in September 1942 that they tried not to remember or talk about it for the rest of their lives. Right outside the ghetto, right next to the barbed wire fence, there was an amusement park. Its main and only attraction that could be seen from the ghetto was the carousel. Children from the ghetto made daily pilgrimages to this place and looked sadly at the children on the other side, who were playing and swinging in boats hanging on the carousel. Music was playing from the radios. The children listened, peered into the strange, alien world in which, as if in a beautiful Neverland, their peers lived. On one side of the barbed wire were children, on the other side were also children, but so different, thanks to the diaries of ghetto prisoners, the memories of those few who managed to survive. Today, it is possible to reconstruct bit by bit the monstrous reality in which people found themselves. Today is a beautiful, sunny day. When the sun shines, my spirits rise. How sad our life is. When we look at the fence surrounding us, our souls, like birds in a cage, are yearning to be free. Sadness tears my heart apart. I see pictures from the past. Will I ever live in better times? Hunger holds you by the throat, chokes you. You can't run away from it. You can't stop thinking about it. I thought about food all the time. There was one more thing. In this situation, you had to remain a decent person. Don't take food from your mother, brother, father, from anyone. Most of the prisoners did not have enough money to support themselves and their families. They lived, thinking from morning to night about only one thing, food, that they did not have. Today I got up after 2 days in bed. I had a cold. I got dressed and passed out. I think it was because of a lack of strength. People gradually die from such a diet. I heard that 15,000 people have died since the Jews were resettled in the ghetto. There was a large pot of water in the room, in which something was boiling. I smelled a very bad smell, looked into the pot and saw that a leather belt from trousers was boiling there. I asked Mrs. Rosenberg, "What are you boiling?" She answered, "It used to be cow or horse skin. If the belt gets soft, I will salt it and give it to the children to eat." The main two feelings were hunger and fear. Every ghetto inhabitant, regardless of his status, walked around with a metal saucepan or mug. People woke up thinking about food and went to bed thinking about it. The constant fear of being killed, not earning enough to buy bread, not feeding oneself and one's children, getting seriously ill inevitably influenced the behavior and thoughts of all ghetto prisoners. Every German could shoot as many Jews as he wanted. If someone approached the fence, was within shooting distance of a German soldier, he died. Hundreds of people said goodbye to life in this way. We were afraid of everything. We always lived in fear. In the ghetto, parents and children often swapped roles. Boys and girls, teenagers became breadwinners. Adults were exhausted by hunger, could not find work, and children who went to school received a bowl of soup every day. For them, it was salvation. Many went to school just for this soup. It was often easier for children to find food than for adults. Some of them took food from younger children. Some stole. As Avram Zickert, a survivor of the Lodz Ghetto, recalled, no one thought about morality. There was no place for morality in the ghetto. There was one rule, one norm. I want to survive. These words contain the entire morality of the ghetto. Parents could not come to terms with the inability to feed their children. They fell into depression. Some committed suicide. After work, we sat around our parents. Daddy and Mommy sat on chairs, and we sat around them. Each took out their portion of bread and broke off a little, so that something could be saved for later. And Dad sat on a chair and told the story of his family. One day, when we were sitting like that, each took out their portion of bread, and Dad just lowered his head. He did not take anything out. Then one of my sisters, Bloomer, stood up and said, Daddy, you have no more bread left. She took out her bread and handed it to him. Everyone stopped eating and gave their pieces of bread to my father. That was the first time in my life that I saw my father cry. He said, what have I come to? Instead of feeding my children, I eat the bread they feed me. I came to see my cousin, to see my uncle and aunt. I can still see them. To terribly thin people were lying in bed with an umbrella over their heads. Before the war, my uncle was strong, very plump. He had lost so much weight that he looked like a skeleton. Next to him lay another skeleton, his wife. The rain was dripping on them from the leaky roof, and they, sick, exhausted, in this bed. On the threshold of death, I stood there and could do nothing. They told me that my uncle had eaten his own fingers. On September 4th, 1942, at about 2 p.m., notices appeared on the walls of the ghetto. The prisoners were told to gather at 3:30 p.m. at Fireman's Square, near 13 Lutomirska Street. Rumors were already circulating in the ghetto that the Germans were planning to deport 20,000 children and old people, but there was no official information. Many did not believe that the Nazis would separate families and take children away from their parents. After the leaflets appeared, it became clear to everyone that the deportation would take place. A couple of hours before the start of Shabbat, the Jews were told who would be deported and when. The day and time were not chosen by chance. The Nazis loved to commit the most terrible things on days sacred to their victims. It became clear that both the supporters of logical thinking and those who lived in hope were wrong. The eviction became a fact. The ghetto residents were terribly mistaken. What seemed impossible and unacceptable only yesterday will become reality. Children under 10 years old will be taken away from their parents and sent to an unknown destination. Old people over 65 will have the last thing they have left: 4 walls, a hard bed. They will be disposed of as unnecessary ballast. There is no home, no family that has not been touched by this terrible tragedy. Someone has a child, someone, an elderly mother or father. No one has the strength to sit at home with folded arms and wait for the verdict. The hardest thing to experience within 4 walls is the despair that corrodes the heart. People take to the streets. By 4 o'clock, a crowd of thousands had gathered on the square. Mothers with infants, married couples, lonely elderly people, they all stood under the scorching sun and waited in horror for news. First, the commandant of the fire service, Henryk Kaufmann, the head of the enterprises in the ghetto, David Warszawski, and then the most influential Jew of the Lodz Ghetto, Mordecai Chaim Rimkowski, spoke to those gathered. It was on the Lodz Square that Rimkowski, whom many called the king of the ghetto, gave a speech that years later historians would call one of the most powerful and fateful speeches of the 20th century. After the attack on Poland in 1939, the Germans carried out a policy of terror. The Nazis decapitated society, arrested, deported, killed political, social, and religious leaders. In dozens of cities, they created ghettos, to which Jews were forcibly brought. The Lodz Ghetto was the second largest after the Warsaw Ghetto. On February 8, 1940, the Jews of Lodz began to be resettled in Bawuty, the worst area of the city, which did not even have a sewer system. 3 months later, this area was fenced with barbed wire. One of the ghetto prisoners, Mordecai Chaim Rimkowski, was appointed by the Nazis as the chairman of the Council of Jewish Elders, the head of Jewish self-government. Rimkowski was born in the town of Ilino in the Vitebsk province. At the age of 15, he decided to move to the industrial city of Lodz, which was then part of the Russian Empire. Before the First World War, Chaim tried his hand at business. He was a co-owner of a weaving factory, and in the interwar period, he worked as an insurance agent, but became known in the city when he took the position of director of an orphanage. Rimkowski spoke poor Polish, but was fluent in German and Russian. When the Nazis appointed Rimkowski as the head of the Council of Jewish Elders, he was 62 years old. He had no children, and his wife had died of cancer 2 years before the war. This man remains one of the most controversial figures of that time. Some believe that it was thanks to the efforts of the chairman that the Lodz Ghetto lasted longer than all the other ghettos in Poland. Others call him a criminal, a collaborator, and an accomplice of the Nazis. Rimkowski seemed all-powerful and could influence almost all areas of the ghetto inhabitants' lives. Chaim Rimkowski was an absolute monarch. He could transfer a person from one job to another. He could send people to prison. He was all-powerful. However, he was powerless against the Germans. They could raise a hand or a stick against him, beat him, or even kill him. But among us, he was a king. We gave him different titles: Your Majesty the Chairman, Chief of the Jewish Elders. We called him the king. Rimkowski did everything to make the existence of the ghetto profitable for the Nazis. Jews worked for pennies in numerous factories, sewed clothes and shoes for the Germans, made household items. Rimkowski's concept can be described in 3 words: survival through work. He evoked extreme emotions. He was hated, feared, respected. Schoolchildren, grateful for a daily free bowl of soup, dedicated poems and songs to Mordecai Rimkowski, sent letters. People remembered Chaim Rimkowski's speech, September 4, 1942, in different ways. Chroniclers controlled by the censorship of the ghetto king wrote, "This proud Jew, who until now had ruled his state with an iron fist, who did not listen to anyone, did everything in his own way, was in despair. He could not hold back his tears. He cried like a child." Henryk Frankus, who was 17 years old in 1942, recalled Rimkowski's behavior differently. At the appointed time, he came to Firefighter Square to listen to the most influential person in the ghetto. I saw the chairman. He stood on the square like an actor in front of a mirror. He was fixing his hair. Perhaps my opinion of this man was largely formed during this speech. While saying terrible things, he behaved like an actor, like a poser. The speech that Henryk Frankus heard then went down in history. American historians included it, along with Winston Churchill's military appeal to the British or Fidel Castro's revolutionary speech, in the list of the most important speeches of the 20th century. These are perhaps the most terrible words that a mother, father, son or daughter can hear in their lives. Mordecai Chaim Rumkowski presented information that cannot fit in the head of any normal person with pathos and grandiloquence. A heavy blow has struck the ghetto. They demand that we give up the most precious thing we have, children and old people. I was not honored to have children of my own, but I devoted the best years of my life to raising orphans. In my old age, I am forced to beg, brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, give me your children. Yesterday, we received an order to expel more than 20,000 Jews from the ghetto. We were told, if you do not agree, we will do it ourselves. I must carry out this difficult and bloody operation to cut off individual limbs in order to preserve the body. I must take your children from you, because if I do not do this, others, God forbid, will also be taken. I stretch out my hands to you and beg you, give these victims into my hands, so that we may avoid new victims. Such is my fate. Today I am forced to stretch out my hands to you and beg, brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, give me your children. During his speech, Rumkowski called himself a broken man. He demanded that those gathered put themselves in his place, since he also felt like a victim of the situation. It is difficult to believe in the chairman's complete sincerity, since both the immediate circle of the good grandfather and the families of the Jewish policemen and bosses were safe. They all knew very well that the Germans would not touch their children and old people. After Rumkowski's words, the square plunged into pitch-black weeping, screaming and groaning. Itzhak Rubenstein was 14 years old at the time. The teenager managed to survive the nightmare. After the war, he said, I stood not far from him and heard how he demanded that the parents give up their children. He spoke in Yiddish, the howl of the crowd. The mothers, after his words, was like a storm that had suddenly begun. It cannot be called a scream. It was a mass howl. The mothers literally tore their hair out. There was such fear in the eyes of the people. No one knew where the children would be given. What would happen to them? Everyone was asking about it, but all the questions remained unanswered. Only one thing was known. The Germans had decided to deport children under 10, old people over 65, and seriously ill people. As the Nazis put it, the ghetto had to be cleared of the unproductive part of the population. After Rumkowski's monstrous speech, children asked, Mommy, will you give me to the Germans? In the streets, unfamiliar women with babies in their arms stopped, looked into each other's eyes, and sobbed bitterly from helplessness. Saturday, September 5th. A new announcement appeared on the walls of the ghetto. The prisoners were informed of an unconditional ban on leaving their apartments. Only police officers, firefighters, doctors, and transport department employees were allowed to move around the streets. Everyone else had to sit at home and wait for a catastrophe, wait for death. On this day, the ethnographer Josef Zelkovich wrote, a deathly silence reigned in the ghetto. Nobody is breathing. The hearts of the ghetto inhabitants are crushed by a huge stone block. The removal operation was started by Jewish policemen. They entered the apartments of the ghetto inhabitants, checked documents, and tried to separate families. For their work, the Nazis promised them sausage, sugar, and 1.5 kilograms of bread a day. Persuasion, tears, pleas of mothers and fathers. It was difficult for the policemen to separate children from their parents. Often they had to take a son or daughter from acquaintances, neighbors, or friends. Some policemen could not stand it, lost consciousness, even tried to commit suicide. As chroniclers wrote, it was possible to buy off the Jewish policemen by giving a bribe to save loved ones. Unlike the policemen, the SS men were merciless and relentless. They came to one yard after another, announced through a loudspeaker or with a shot that all the inhabitants should go outside. The SS men did not look at birth certificates or passports. They decided who to keep and who to take away by eye, based on the prisoner's appearance, and suddenly the officer appeared in front of us, me and my mother. I was first, my mother was behind me. He paused at first, then moved on. Our closest neighbor was standing next to her. She was holding a 1.5-year-old child in her arms. The SS man ordered the child to be taken away. The woman didn't even say anything. She stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed. Then we were ordered to go upstairs. We came to the apartment. This woman lived in the next room. We passed through her room. She was sitting on the floor, her gaze frozen, either at the sky or at the wall. 45 years later, in 1989, I returned to this house. The first thing that appeared before my eyes was that neighbor with the child. The prisoners understood that the Nazis were most likely planning to kill their children, but they did not lose hope. They dressed the children in their best clothes, gave them food to take with them, a favorite toy. Some hung nameplates with their names, surnames, and addresses around their necks. What if the child was saved? What if someone adopted him? What if he miraculously got to an orphanage? Let them know their names and surnames. The Nazis killed parents who resisted on the spot. In just 1 week, the Germans shot about 600 people in the courtyards and on the streets of the ghetto. During those days, deathly silence alternated with inhuman howling, screaming and groaning in Lodz. It was as if body parts were being cut off, healthy teeth were being pulled out, living people were being quartered. The pain was so great that it was impossible to describe, impossible to bear. It was stronger than any person. People were screaming monstrously. How terrible it was that fate had allowed this to happen. Mothers followed the carts and begged, "Take us too." Each one called for her child, Moisha, Yosia, Kuba. The children were screaming, "Mama." The Germans beat and kicked the mothers, not allowing them to come closer. The Nazis were especially brutal in hospitals. Many children's lives were cut short there. It was on Mlynarska Street. I remember the barrier, and there were trucks opposite. They were cleaning the hospital. They were throwing children out of the windows, from the 4th floor. They were throwing them out of the windows into the trucks like things. It was horrible. It's impossible to forget. Then they took out everyone who could walk. In half an hour or even 15 minutes, they had completely cleaned the hospital, which housed several hundred people. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. Then we found out that this was happening not only in this hospital. There was such silence after what happened. Shock, shock. I was 16 years old then. I will never forget the scream of one mother. I saw her from the window. She hid her child. When the Germans came, the child jumped out of hiding and ran into the yard. They caught him. This woman screamed like an animal being slaughtered. She screamed all night. According to historians, in a week the Nazis cleansed the ghetto of 15 to 20,000 unproductive units. The SS men took away not only children under 10, but also older ones. Because of hunger and disease, the teenagers did not look their age, so they were also ordered to get into a cart and taken to a place from which they would not return. This also applied to adults. People aged 40 to 50 were taken for old people. People over 65 were subject to deportation orders. There are known cases where parents decided that the best way out of this monstrous situation would be death. Without waiting for the Nazis to arrive, they first killed their children and then said goodbye to life themselves. Over the course of a week, the Nazis took thousands of girls, boys, and older people to the so-called filtration points, farming large parties of children and old people. Eyewitnesses who managed to survive the war recalled that not all children cried. Many, forgetting about their parents' tears, were happy that they had finally left the ghetto and seen what the world looked like behind the barbed wire. There were many other children around, and they perceived what was happening as a journey, an excursion. Then the Germans transported those condemned to death to Chelmno, the first death camp in occupied Poland, Kolmhof. The village of Chelmno is located 70 kilometers from Lodz. Those who come here for the first time are amazed at how beautiful it is. The picturesque Ner River, a dense forest. The death camp was located in a small castle located on a hill. The little condemned were brought to a beautiful white house, ordered to take off their clothes and wash. At the end of the long corridor, they walked along. There was not actually a shower, but a mobile gas chamber designed for the mass extermination of people. The children went in there. The doors were closed behind them and the gas was turned on. After 10 minutes, everyone in the chamber was dead. None of the children brought to Chelmno survived. Trying to cover up the traces of the crimes, in 1943 the Germans blew up the castle and took away all the documents. Today, there is a museum on the site of the death camp. Its employees say that almost nothing remains of the thousands of children who were killed. Since June 1942, the Nazis stopped burying victims in mass graves and began burning their bodies in crematorium ovens. Only toys, which are kept in the museum, lasted longer than the children. According to a surviving report from the ghetto administration, 15,850 people were sent from Lodz to Chelmno from September 5 to 12, 1942. Some researchers believe that the Nazis actually took about 20,000 children and older people to Chelmno and gassed them. In their opinion, Rumkowski deliberately understated the statistics in order to receive rations from the Germans for dead souls. In memory of those who were saved, the Park of the Saved was opened in Lodz. In 2004, the trees planted in the park symbolized the prisoners of the Lodz Ghetto who survived the Holocaust. Many of them survived by chance. When the Germans were approaching our house in September 1942, Mommy said that we would not wait for them to come, to wait for them to take us away. My parents decided that we would have our last family dinner. There were potatoes, cucumbers, beets, and radishes on the table. We ate it all. Then, instead of going out, Dad and Mommy lay down in bed. Dad picked up a book, and my brother and I sat on the floor with backpacks. We waited. We heard people screaming, crying, and someone shooting. I don't even know how long it lasted. At some point, all the screaming died down. Then there was silence. They didn't come for us. Mom was 42, and Dad was 51 or 52. They looked very old, and they were both taken away. I was 13. They asked me how old I was and left me in the yard. My parents were the last to get into the truck. I was looking at the Nazi with the dog and the machine gun. When he turned away and didn't look at the truck, I ran up and quickly pulled my parents out of there. It took 30 seconds because they were on the edge of the truck. If they had been deeper, I wouldn't have been able to do anything. I led them into the yard. Human behavior in such a situation cannot be analyzed. In my mind, there was only a feeling of kinship with my mom and dad, a burning desire to save them, which pushed me.